Huntington Library in San Marino, California, was once the private residence of railroad tycoon Henry Edward Huntington and his wife Arabella. Established in 1919, the library continues to operate as an educational and research institute that houses an extensive collection of art and rare books. The property also consists of over a dozen themed botanical gardens, where guests are free to wander through nature's splendor. The Huntingtons built a small paradise on their estate, and it is here they are entombed in an elegant Greco-Roman mausoleum that served as a prototype for a national memorial in Washington, D.C. Come walk with me and explore the lives and legacies of Henry and Arabella Huntington. At age 21, Henry Huntington entered the railroad business when he went to work with his uncle Collis P. Huntington, who was one of the men who helped build the first transcontinental railroad in the United States. In 1892, Henry moved to San Francisco with his wife and 4 children. There he co-managed the holding company for the Southern and Central Pacific Railroads. In the spring of the same year, he visited Southern California for the first time. Impressed with the area's potential to become a major commercial and cultural center, Huntington immediately went to work developing its resources. He invested in real estate and public utilities, and began consolidating the city's many electric railway systems to form the interurban Pacific Electric Railway Company, known locally as the Red Car System. At its height, the Red Car boasted 2,700 scheduled trains per day. It connected the greater Los Angeles area to Orange County in the south and extended as far east as San Bernardino and Redlands. By putting manufacturers within reach of the labor force, the Red Car helped usher in one of the greatest economic booms in modern history. By age 60, Huntington was ready to devote most of his time to his lifelong passion of collecting rare books and art. He sold off most of his interest in the Pacific Railway and began amassing one of the greatest research libraries in the world. He purchased the San Marino Ranch in 1903, but it wasn't until 1911 that he built the sprawling Beaux Arts mansion overlooking the San Gabriel Valley. It was followed 10 years later with a large library to house his book collection. Soon after, railroad cars from New York, filled with priceless books, began arriving at San Marino. The collection includes an original copy of the Gutenberg Bible and an illustrated edition of Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, printed in the early 15th century. It is the most complete copy of the tales known to exist. There are editions of Shakespeare's plays printed during his lifetime, as well as the first published folio of his works. The library also possesses a copy of John J. Audubon's Birds of America, with spectacular life-size illustrations, all colored by hand. And these are just a tiny part of a collection that continues to grow. In 1913, Henry Huntington, who by then had been divorced from his first wife for several years, was married a second time. He did not venture far out of his family to find his bride, who was the widow of his Uncle Collis. Arabella Duval Huntington was 34 when she married Collis, who was 62. The details of her humble beginning are somewhat mysterious, which is exactly the way she wanted it. Her father died when she was young, and her mother owned a boarding house. After Collis Huntington's death, she inherited over $150 million, making her one of the richest women in the world. Arabella was also known for her philanthropy and supported a wide range of programs, from cancer research to causes for African Americans. She had a taste for the finer things in life, including art, which had a great influence on Henry. Her personal collection is part of the European art collection located in the main house. There are works by French and British masters such as Jean-Antoine Houdon, Joshua Reynolds, and George Romney. There are paintings by Thomas Gainsborough, including the cornerstone of the collection, The Blue Boy. It was purchased by Henry Huntington in 1921 for the then record price of $728,000. The San Francisco Chronicle tacked on a little extra for their headline. The gallery also has the Blue Boy's traditional companion, painted by Thomas Lawrence. It is the portrait of Sarah Barrett Moulton, best known as Pinky. There seems to be no end to the assemblage of 18th century portraiture and landscapes. A separate gallery houses American artwork, where you will find John Singleton Copley, as well as works by Mary Cassatt, Edward Hopper, and Andy Warhol. The estate's gardens were developed by Huntington's superintendent William Hertrick, who combined a working ranch and botanical gardens that included rare and exotic plants from the world over. One of the most anticipated events at the library is the blooming of the odoriferous corpse flower. A native from the rainforests of Sumatra, the plant gets its name from its foul odor. Despite the smell, people travel from around the world in the hopes of seeing it in bloom, which is a rare event, occurring once every few years. Before we move on to the mausoleum, let's step outside and take a short tour of just a few of the Huntington's spectacular gardens. The Huntington San Marino home was carefully planned and supervised by Henry and Arabella during their lifetimes, but they rarely spent more than a month here every year. Huntington believed that the 1920s would see the beginning of a new renaissance, and he wanted his library and art collection to be at the center of it. So in 1919, Henry and Arabella gave their estate with all its treasures as a gift to the public. A trust was established to manage the library and to ensure that the collections would continue to grow. The vice chairman of the trust was Huntington's close friend and business associate, George S. Patton Sr., who was also the father of General Patton. In this photo, we see the Huntingtons spending a quiet afternoon with the Pattons on their back porch. Young George, who was on leave from the Virginia Military Institute, can be seen on the left, standing between his mother and Arabella. George S. Patton Sr. was featured in Grave Exploration's video on San Gabriel Cemetery. A link to that video has been added to the description below. Through the early 1920s, the Huntingtons made frequent trips from California to New York and Paris, even as Arabella's health began to fail. In 1924, she paid her last visit to the San Marino estate before returning to her home in New York. It was there on September 16th of that year she died at the age of 74. Arabella's body was sent to California for burial, and in remembrance to her marriage to Collis P. Huntington, this cenotaph to her was erected close to his resting place at Woodlawn Cemetery in New York. Meanwhile, Henry Huntington hired celebrated architect John Russell Pope to build his mausoleum. Constructed of Colorado Ewell marble, Pope's design was in the form of a circular peristyle Greek temple capped with a dome. He believed that the design was suited to the grounds because it provided the perfect front from every angle. Pope would later revisit this concept on a much larger scale when he designed the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. On the mausoleum's inner colonnade are panels representing the four seasons of life and nature. They were sculpted by John Gregory, who also made the winged figure on the sarcophagus. Henry Huntington would never see the finished mausoleum. He died in Philadelphia following surgery on May 23, 1927. The passing of this great philanthropist was a cause of great sadness. Throngs of mourners were on hand to greet his body when it arrived in California for interment. He was laid to rest beside his beloved Arabella, but it wouldn't be for another 2 years that their mausoleum was finally completed. And it is from this peaceful hilltop abode that the library's benefactors keep watch over their ever-growing legacy that continues to educate, enlighten, and inspire, and will do so for generations to come. Thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw, give it a thumbs up. And if you enjoy these stories and are interested in becoming a sponsor, please visit my Patreon page by clicking the link in the description. Even the smallest contribution will go a long way to creating more content. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel now for more grave explorations.